Hey everybody, Andy Ryder here with Project Lab. My woodshop improvement mission continues. Previously I built a miter saw station and a bandsaw stand out of old office furniture. More recently I've been working on workshop organization. And a big part of that has been getting rid of stuff that I'm never gonna use. Like this. I scored this joiner for $5 back in 2017 thinking I could fix it up on the cheap. Most of the time, the fact that you're watching a video would mean that I succeeded, but not this time. This time was a fail. But I still learned some good lessons along the way, so I figured I'd share them here anyway. First off, what's the purpose of this thing? A jointer is a woodworking tool that lets you flatten wood. If your boards aren't flat, things aren't gonna fit together right, so it just makes life easier to be able to do that. Joiners aren't real common tools, so it's a little tough to understand what they even do, but they're actually pretty simple. There's an infeed table, an outfeed table, and a cutter head. All three of these things are all on the same plane. That is, they all should be perfectly flat in line with each other. So then when you drop the infeed table down, you can take a warped board, for example, and push it through the joiner. And the cutter head will cut off that height difference between the two tables. And with enough passes of this, you get a flat board. There's lots of ways to flatten boards, whether it's using jigs on a table saw or a circular saw or a router. But this thing is purpose built for flattening, so it can be a nice tool to have around. So why was this only $5? One, it's small. It's a 4-inch joiner, which in theory means that you can't flatten anything wider than 4 inches. Matthias Wandel on Wood Gears has an example of how you can take a board and flip it around to extend this, but it's still pretty small. Two, the fence is broken. This is cast iron, and without getting too far into that, cast iron is tougher to weld than something like a forged piece of rod, like over here. So it'd take a lot of effort to fix this, but I thought I could figure out a way. And number three, it didn't come with a motor nor pulleys. So first thing I had to do was find a motor. I had a spare motor sitting around, but this spins at 3450 rotations per minute. The cutter head spins at 4500 rotations per minute. So first I had to figure out what pulley combination would get me to that 4500 speed. One way to figure this out is through cross multiplication. We'll need 3 variables to figure out the 4th one. That means that we're gonna have to somewhat arbitrarily pick a pulley size for one of these two. I ended up starting with a 2-inch pulley for the jointer because I need this to spin faster than the motor, so I want this to be smaller than the motor size. That way it can make revolutions quicker. So this is a 2-inch pulley, and then we'll use the variable X for our motor. 2 times 4500 is 9,000, and that equals 3450x. Now we need to divide 9,000 by 3450. That's 2.6 equals x. That's roughly 2.5 inches. So means a 2.5-inch pulley for the motor side. I'm not great at math. I didn't want to have to worry about getting my numbers backwards here somewhere and having incorrect calculation here being a variable that would screw things up down the line. So another way we could figure this out is to use a Pulley Calculator online. And again, we get about 2.5 inches. You're never gonna find an exact 2.6-inch pulley, so this is as close as we can get right now at least. I was able to pick these up locally at Northern Tool for about 10 to 15 bucks a piece. I would call this fail number 1. If I had been more prepared at this point, I would have been able to use a piece of scrap wood to make those pulleys instead of having to shell out close to 30 bucks for an experiment. I don't have a lathe, but I could have just cut a circle out of a piece of plywood and then jammed it on the end of a motor and then used a chisel to turn it down to the right size from there. But that whole process was pretty intimidating. I've never done it before, and it would have taken a bunch of work to even get to that point. So I went this route, and now I've got $30 worth of pulleys sitting around. Hopefully they'll come in handy sometime in the next 70 years. Anyway, with the pulley sizes figured out, I could get them installed on the motor and the joiner. Then I had to mount the motor and the jointer so that I could safely work on this. I just temporarily used some scrap wood and rigged something up. And then it was time to test it out. Everything stayed together, which was nice, but the end result was not great. You can hear that the blade is cutting on the front of the board, but not the back. Research suggested that a good place to start would be to sharpen the blades. I could have bought some new ones, but the blades looked decent. Instead, I bought this joiner blade sharpening jig. The instructions were terrible on it, so I had to try a bunch of different things. I ended up concluding that the two different stones were two different grits, and by loosening up the tool and changing the orientation of those stones in the different sides, you could do different things like sharpening the bevel of the blade or flattening the back of the blade, and then working your way from one grit to the other. I would consider this process to be failure number 2. These blades were probably too dull to be using such fine sharpening stones. If I would have had my bench grinder ready at this point, I could have taken it there, sharpened the blades on the bench grinder, and then honed them with this gadget in the joiner. But I wasn't ready for that. This still worked, but it took way longer than it should have. So with the blades sharpened, I tried it again. It still wasn't working great. The board was definitely not flat. Research also suggested that I should make sure all the top surfaces of the joiner were really in line with each other. The outfeed and the infeed tables looked close enough to me, which was good because to adjust those, I had to flip the thing upside down. It's going to be a real pain to flip it back and forth a bunch of times. So now I had to figure out how to adjust the blades. The manual read like Greek to me, so instead I went to YouTube and found Ty Moser's joiner knife setting jig. This seemed idiot-proof. You hot glue a magnet to a piece of wood, and then you put the magnet over top of the blades. The blades stick to the magnet, and in theory, they are at exactly the right height because the bottom of the magnet is on the top surface of the infeed and the outfeed table. The problem with this is that my jointer won't let you screw in the blades at this point. You have to rotate the cutter head in order to get access to those bolts. So the magnet can't grip the blades, it just doesn't work. So I revisited the manual. They want you to raise the blades up above the surface of the joiner and then snug the blades down and then use a piece of hardwood to tap the blades into place. I did my best here, but boy was this hard. So I tested it again, and it sounded better this time, but then that sound is the blades hitting that metal safety guard. I must have had the blades too high, and eventually the guard settled in place and hit those blades. I'm pretty sure the guard's made out of aluminum, but it's still not good for sharpness to have the cutter head start to cut into a big piece of metal like that. So I resharpened the blades, and then I tried one last thing to get the blades aligned, my micrometer. This thing is very precise for dialing in tools, but I had a tough time with it here. I just had to move it all over. And where do you measure from to get consistent results? Top dead center at the tip of the blade on 3 separate blades? That's not easy. I tried anyway. Then I gave it one final test. And the test board still wasn't flat. I would consider this to be the last straw, the final fail of this project. It was just way too finicky to get these blades set right. This type of task is among the least fun in the workshop because you're trying to do something that needs to be really precise, but you have no clue if you're even doing it right during the process. Setting one of these blades correctly would be tough. Doing 3 of them, and they all need to be so precise. It can throw off everything if they're not. But the tool doesn't give you the ability to set them accurately. Imagine trying to put a clock together with the lights off, but less fun. So let's review. Was this project worth it? So I spent 40 to 50 bucks on this in the end. More importantly, wow, I lost a ton of time. I still learned stuff, but the reason why I'm cutting this off is that to me it's just not worth it anymore. If this was my grandpa's jointer or some 12-inch monster that as soon as you got it running you had this tool that was amazing, but instead it's small and it's broken. Even if I got it running nice, I was still facing more challenges. But oh well, you live and learn. So what would I recommend instead? This is what I did. This Porter cable joiner is about 250, 260 bucks. It's a heck of a lot more money, but it's 6 inches instead of 4. It comes calibrated out of the box, and it actually takes up less space. There's not some motor sitting around separately, and it let me get to the projects I really wanted to do instead. You do what you want. I'm happy with this. So what am I gonna do with the old one? I could try to ship it to somebody, but it weighs 55 pounds. That's gonna cost a fortune to ship. To ship a broken 4-inch joiner doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm probably just gonna take it apart, reuse the infeed and the outfeed table, which are flat, for sharpening or sanding, and then recycle anything that I can't figure out a good use for. And I'll save somebody the headache of trying to fix this thing. I just wanna get rid of this base so that it's less of an injury hazard too. Don't really need some 55-pound random thing falling off and hurting somebody. So as always, I hope you liked this video, and if you have any thoughts or questions, you can leave them down below in the comments on YouTube. I try to respond to anybody who stops by. I'm real behind right now. I'll get to you, get to all of you. Thanks for watching.